and SCI YouTube. It's going live. You are live. Hello. Welcome to episode. Oh, I just titled it. I don't remember the number. I think it's 78. Gridcoin Fireside. Today is March 21st, 2023. We are continuing the discussion we started last week where we were talking about the future of Gridcoin. I think today we will be talking about Benefactor contracts and how they work a little more intricately. I'm personally looking forward to hearing about the accrual system because that is a part of Gridcoin I have never dove deep on. So that should be fun. That said, you can join us every Tuesday. We do these. It's whenever we got time at this point on the Gridcoin Discord server. You can find it if you want to find it, gridcoin.us. Otherwise, join the YouTube. Feel free to join in the chat, throw comments in, and we'll bring it live on stream.
Yeah, can you give me what's the YouTube link? Hold on a minute.
Yeah, let me grab it. If you on YouTube,
so I can see the comments when people.
I'll send it to you on Discord here.
Oh.
And we are also live on the Twitter Gridcoin server. All right, let me switch up my dogs. Let's enter the cone of shame for me not knowing what the accrual system is. That's too cute to be a cone of shame. There we go. That's a cone of shame. All right, so Jim, maybe you want to jump in and tell us what's going on.
That's a sad looking dog.
I know. She's coming back from getting her tail fixed because it got shut in a door and it got split open, so she had to get stitches.
And then she'll gnaw on the tail if you don't keep it away from her, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Poor puppy.
Yep. So let's talk about so we're going to continue the discussion around the benefactor contracts, which we had started, I guess it was actually 2 weeks ago, right? The session we did. But before we do that, I think we need to go back to base principles and talk about something called the accrual system, which is a fancy name for people that do crunching already know very well, even though they don't think they know it. So the accrual system is the module of Gridcoin that actually keeps track of how much GRC is owed to people that are doing crunching. That's what it is. So effectively, folks that are have been in this community for a while know the terms magnitude. They know the term pending rewards or accrued rewards. Everyone, I think, that does crunching and has they know what beacons are. And then folks that have a beacon and are crunching or doing research see that pending reward field on the main screen, which continues to increment in real time. All these things are actually tied into the accrual system. So the accrual system utilizes beacons, utilizes the super block, the concept of magnitudes, utilizes time, all these different things to compute what people are owed. Now, how does that relate to concepts like we talked about before? So remember, right now, the Gridcoin network, by protocol, the entire network, the magnitude has to add up to 115,000. It's plus or minus five or six units on the end there because of rounding. But 115,000 is the magnitude. It is fixed by definition. And also there's another number called the magnitude unit, which is actually a fraction now. It's set to 1/4. So basically, the magnitude divided by multiplied times the magnitude unit equals the number of GRC that is accrued to researchers every day. Notice I'm using the term accrued, not paid. So what really happens is everyone has a magnitude, which is their share of the network magnitude. And I'm not going to go through the details of how that's calculated, because we've done this. We've talked over those calculations many different times in prior firesides. I would encourage you to go to the website and look at the magnitude in the wiki, or else refer to other firesides. But the bottom line is everyone gets their magnitude number, and it's basically that magnitude times the amount of time that's gone by since if they're brand new, they advertised their beacon and it was verified, or if they're an old time cruncher, it's the last time they were paid crunching. And that number continues to increment. And basically the rate at which that number grows, the accrual, is dictated by the magnitude in that particular day. When the super block comes in for the next day, the rate changes. So you can see the accrual essentially goes up as piecewise. The rate changes every day based on what your magnitude is, and the number continues to go up until you actually stake or request an MRC, in which case that pending reward, the accrual, gets paid to you. And the accrual is then reset to zero. So that's the accrual system. The wallet has to keep track of every single CPID's accrual. Now you think, my God, that's crazy. How would the wallet do that? It doesn't really in real time update. What it does is it has from the super block, it has a table of magnitudes. There is a accrual directory, if you look in the data directory, which has files with a number on it. And those files are basically the super block heights. So what happens is when a super block is staked, not only is the super block put in the network where the wallet knows the rate of every single individual's magnitude, but the wallet also knows in that file what every single CPID holder is owed at the time the super block was issued. And so what the wallet does is it computes the amount of time that's elapsed since the super block, or you were last paid, if it's sooner than that. And via that time elapsed times the magnitude rate for that day, it knows how much you are owed. And it's very easy to calculate. And it's done on demand. So we don't actually we don't have a squirrel in a hamster cage running, computing thousands of CPID holders accruals at any one moment. Basically, there's just a function that you put in the CPID, you put in the amount of time that's gone by since the last super block or the last payment, and it spits out a number, which is the amount that's owed to that person at that exact time. So this scales very well. The person that's running the wallet, it's only computing the accrual on them. It doesn't have to compute their accrual on everybody else. Converse, and also when the block is staked, which means someone's claiming that they accrued and are paid out rewards, all the other nodes that receive that block check that CPID's accrual only to make sure that the stake is correct. So that's how we scale this thing. We're not actually really computing accruals for thousands and thousands of CPIDs all at once. We're only computing them on demand, but we can do it for any CPID at any time. Now, that's the base accrual system.
Can I ask a question here?
Yeah.
So is there ever a situation, there's two ways to ask this, I think. I'll ask both ways. Is there ever a situation where there's GRC accrued behind a CPID that just never gets paid out, and so that GRC just never exists? And the other way to ask this is, does the GRC waiting to be distributed to a cruncher already exist, like in a contract, or is it just not a thing until that person stakes a block? Or does
so the answer is there are CPIDs that have had lost pending rewards. So if you remember when people let their beacon expire and they never come back to it, those accrued GRC are stuck, right?
And you can't get them. No one could ever get them.
No, you can. So what's interesting about that is the system. Someone can force advertise a CPID where the beacon expired, and as long as they prove that they, via the verification process of the beacon, that they own that CPID, the system will bridge over to the new beacon.
Interesting.
So you can actually recover those rewards because you're proving that you own that CPID. So those rewards are rightfully yours. But there are people that have never done that, right? I mean, especially when Fern happened, there were a number of old beacons that were essentially expired that were never picked up. I've never gone back to compute how much pending GRC was lost. I will tell you that the amount of actual payout of GRC is very, very close to the theoretical amount that's accrued, which means that, in fact, very few, if any, GRC are actually out there stuck. That the system
really cool.
has essentially attained an equilibrium where, obviously there's a buffer between how much is accrued and then how much is actually paid. But that's just like a sliding brick where both bricks are moving in parallel, and the distance between them really isn't changing very much at this point. So that's a good thing. It also indicates that the system, on the whole, the system is very effectively via staking, and now that MRC is around, via those two mechanisms, distributing the GRC that is owed to people, which is a good thing. So that's this part two of your question, which is a really good one, is the answer is the accrued GRC are owed by contract. It's not a smart contract, but it's a contract nonetheless. The whole beacon, you can think of the advertising the beacon and all the series of super blocks that are issued after that as essentially one continuing contract where the system, you've advertised a beacon and proved that you own this CPID. The system then in turn guarantees that it will accrue GRC at a given rate, and as long as you continue to keep that beacon up to date, you're going to get paid those GRC. So it is a contract. And it's enforced, by the way, by every node in the network, right? So no one can come in and claim that they are owed, some ridiculous amount of GRC for a CPID, because the nodes will say that's crazy. Every node knows how to compute the rewards for every CPID, and will do so. If someone makes a claim that they're owed, GRC that's not right, that block will get rejected and they'll be banned. So, the node has a very, very strong enforcement of all the accrual amounts. It's done both for when blocks are staked, and it's also done for MRC requests, right? So no one can, for example, create a fake MRC request that claims that I'm owed 2 million GRC, and then that's not true, because when they try and send that contract out, it'll get squashed and they'll get banned, right? So as the penalty.
Interesting. So I guess another question, maybe before we get into the Benefactor contract and how that utilizes the accrual system, is why do we do it this way and not another way? Like, what's the benefits, and are there specific drawbacks to using this accrual system that you can think of at least?
It's really not. It would be very difficult to do it any other way, because you can't. Remember that the system cannot pay real coins to people unless we have a originating key, which then centralizes the payment system, right? So to avoid having a centralized payment system, and by the way, that if that starts sounding like a pool, that's because that's what a pool is, right? If you're gonna hold real GRC in a real account and then pay that GRC out to somebody, remember, because of the way blockchains and transaction worked, the inputs to that transaction of payment have to be signed by a real key, which means somebody has to hold those funds. And then you have a question of centrality, right? There's a central entity holding it. The way Gridcoin is done now with an accrual system, the accrual is an artifact of the network itself. Basically, every node is computing the accrual in an identical way. It is an artifact of the network protocol itself that the accrual is there, but those are virtual coins. They're not actually real until they become real, right? You can think of them as guaranteed IOUs by the network, right? And the beauty about that is, because it's a network artifact, any staker computes the accrual and then signs it, the claim to their rewards, and then every other node verifies it. So the staker has their primary key or their private key because they're staking their reward. And then the network pays out those rewards. And of course, and this is where we're getting to what's coming along in this paper that Will and I have been writing. Right now, all of the GRC rewards that are paid to crunchers are generated coins, meaning that these coins are created out of thin air as part of the staking process. They didn't exist before. They're literally, if you want to, you can actually go look at a particular staking transaction, and you can see, you can add up all the inputs to that transaction, which in stake there's only one on the coin stake, and then you add up all the outputs, and you'll notice that the outputs add up to more than the input. Well, why? That's how it works. Essentially, the staker, when they go claim their reward, they compute their accrued GRC. The accrued GRC gets added to the output amount, so that essentially the output is greater than the input by exactly that amount that they're owed. And so those coins are literally created out of thin air to pay our crunchers. Now,
let me just stress that really quick for anyone who might not be fully following. The accrual system, from what I'm learning about this in depth for the first time, but it sounds like it is the way to make Gridcoin. It lets us decentralize the way that we distribute the coins. Any other way of doing it, at least that we know of, it would be like, exactly, it would be doing like what Ripple did, or what Banano does, or what Gridcoin does, or Foldcoin. Right? It would be a centralized purse held by some organization or some person that knows how much everyone is owed, and then distributes coins from that centralized purse. What the accrual system does is it makes that purse decentralized, verifiable by everyone, and based on what you said, Jim, it makes it very resistant to cheating and very scalable. So it seems like a very cool tool.
It is. It's complicated to code, as you might imagine, because you have to, every node's got to be able to cross-verify any stake that's done by a node or or a stake as a result of an MRC request. Because in the MRC request case, what's really going on is the MRC requester is when you punch the button, you're basically submitting a contract to the network that says, I am owed this much GRC as of the last staked block based on my CPID and my accrual. I'm talking about the MRC requester. That goes out over the network. The next block that stakes, they have that MRC request in their memory pool. When it gets bound to the staking block, the staker not only computes his or her own reward, which is if they're a cruncher plus this 10 CBR, but then they also take the MRC contract and compute how much money they're going to pay to the MRC requester based on that CPID's numbers, which they can verify, because remember, any node can verify anybody's accrual at any time. And when they do that, the stakers MRC, their outputs are grossed up essentially to cover the MRC payments. That's how it works, right? So effectively, their output includes their reward, and then you have essentially a specialized side stake, which is the MRC payment, back to the MRC requester. It is a side stake, but there's special logic to make sure that that amount is correct and it goes to the right address. Because remember, MRCs can only go back to the beacon address. No other address is allowed, because that would allow fraud to be introduced. The beacon address is the only address that we know of that can be relied upon for the MRC requester, because that's the address that was bound to the beacon advertisement that they proved they own, right? So you can think of the beacon as binding together a CPID, the BOINC account ownership, and a private public key pair in the wallet, which is an address. And so that's the only address that we can reliably pay back to in MRC requests. That's why we do not ever allow functionality to allow MRC payments to be redirected to a third-party address. That would introduce a huge vector for fraud, and it's just not a good idea. So that's how MRCs work. So MRCs are a form of delegated staking. Essentially, you're saying, I would like the next staker, since I don't have a very high balance, to stake my reward for me and pay it back to me. That's how it works. And by the way, every node in the network verifies it. So when that block goes out, that includes the staker's own payment, plus up to 9 other MRC payments at the same time. Every node of the network verifies every single one of those to make sure that they're correct. If they're not, the block gets rejected and the staker's going to get banned, most likely. So
very cool. Did the accrual, like you did MRC, like the whole thought process, how that worked? Is the accrual system from original Gridcoin? Is
Yeah.
that a Rob?
No. Well, he had a primitive accrual system, but it was you remember Forkopolis, right? So
Yes. How could we forget?
so part of the Forkopolis was that the accrual system that he had designed, which was really not very well written, was buggy, and in some cases delivered erroneous accrual calculations from one node to the next. And so if the nodes disagreed on what they believed were people were owed, you can imagine chaos would ensue, right? And that's exactly why Gridcoin was so fork prone earlier in the earlier years, was because the this is a very difficult problem to code. You know, remember, we've got nodes spanning many different architectures, right? So we've got Intel, both 32 and 64-bit on all sorts of different CPUs. We've got ARM. We've got Apple M1. We've got Apple x86. We've got, people. I think there are even some people running PowerPC stuff. Yes, believe it or not, on OpenSUSE Open Build Service, they compile a PowerPC version of the wallet. So we run all these different architectures, and the issue is, no matter what architecture the node runs on, when it does these calculations, it's got to come up with exactly the same results. So, working all the bugs out of that so that we could make sure that the nodes agree with each other exactly so that we don't fork was a big challenge. One of the things we had to do was throw out, believe it or not, all the floating point code. And in fact, the accrual system is entirely integer arithmetic based. So we use very large integers. We're very careful about the order of operations of multiplication, division. And the reason we do that is because those are guaranteed to give exactly the same result no matter what platform you're on. Whereas floating point, the last couple of digits in the floating point mantissa may change. And that's enough to cause forks. So we actually avoid internally floating point in the entire accrual system, and everything is represented as integers. We convert it back to floating point for presentation purposes because that's what people expect, but that's actually not how it's represented internally anymore. That wasn't the only thing that was causing Rob's code to be flaky, but that was a big one. He was a heavy user of floating point in areas where he had no business using it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah,
That's part of Gridcoin history I never understood. So it's Rob's idea. Like, it's a good idea executed poorly, and then
just like his magnitude system was his idea. It was a fabulous idea, but executed very poorly.
Credit where due, by all means. Like, it's Gridcoin from the early days, absolutely brilliant in terms of what it's doing.
Brilliant concept, terrible execution. We fixed it.
Yeah, so that was you, Rayvon. I think Paul was contributing at that time. Who else were the big folks?
Well, I
did
the scraper part, which was the first major piece, right? Which was to fix the statistics collection process. And it was me. Rayvon contributed some to that, and then another guy you probably remember. I'll remember in a minute. Give me a second. There's another party that was involved, and then of course later on, Fireside came around, and he actually did the Thomas brought up did the network part of the scraper to help me push all the objects over the network. Very, very clever work he did to basically leverage the the nodes talk to each other via what's called a gossip network, right? They send transactions back and forth. So he figured out a way to leverage that general network to actually send the statistics back and forth among the nodes. And that's how the scrapers communicate to all the rest of the nodes, and they cross everything. Very, very elegant piece of code that Thomas created. And then Fireside came along, and I had created this shiny new scraper that was still strapped onto some of old Rob's code. And, for Fern, we rewrote all the rest of it. So, we rewrote the beacons, we rewrote the accrual system itself. We implemented the superblock Windows concept, which was really sketched out by Rayvon many years ago, but we implemented it fully. And that's what resulted in this magnitude change every super block, and then this daily super block segment Y is a piece together of your accrual. That's really super block windows. You can go look at the old wikis and see the ideas starting to come out from Ravon's many years ago. So it's been a labor of love by a number of people over a multi-year period to get this all working well. And
My God, it's been 11 years. We've been
knock
on route
on
for
wood,
11 years.
smooth as silk now, right? I mean,
Okay. So
that would be the way I describe the network. It's we don't have a lot of forking excitement anymore, which is a good thing.
it's a very boring network to
So
run.
that's really Gridcoin's accrual as it stands today.
Okay.
Now, and we touched on this the last episode. The problem with this is that it's again, the coins are being created out of thin air. And so the question comes down to this: how do Gridcoin needs to scale. We need to we want more and more people contributing. We want our network to grow. Well, if you think about it, since we're distributing 115,000 divided by 4 GRC every day to the accrual, and that basically is being paid out to people, the more and more people we add to the network, the less and less everybody gets, right? It's a 1 over n problem. The bigger the n gets, the smaller that 1 over n is. You can put 115,000 at the top, but I mean, it's the same idea. So what do? How do we scale the network? Because if we leave it like this without any other incentive layer, the network becomes self-limiting. Essentially, enough people join that their magnitude, effectively what happens is people's average magnitude decreases, right? As the number of people, as the competition goes up, and the amount of payments to everybody, which is key to their magnitude, goes down. And so people, eventually say, well, it's not worth it anymore. I'm just going to stop. And so essentially an equilibrium is obtained. And, that equilibrium, quite frankly, is lower than we want it to be in terms of the number of participants that we would like to have over time. So that and a lot of other things that we really would like to do are leading us to a place where we want to extend the accrual system to be able to do something called benefactor contracts. Let me hold on a second. I have to do a text message. So, what are benefactor contracts? I'll tell you what they are. It's a brand new concept that we've come up with to add another crunching reward layer on top of the existing layer. It's not going to replace the existing layer. So we're leaving the magnitude system, the generated coins, let's call CBR layer 1, which is the constant block rewards. That's the staking reward. Let's call the researcher cruncher current system layer 2. So what we're proposing is to create a third layer on top of that, the second research layer, the third layer overall, which will pay people according to a different set of rules. And the idea is that instead of these coins being generated out of thin air, we're going to create a new kind of beacon, which is we have beacons for crunchers that want to contribute computing. We're going to create beacons for benefactors. And the idea of a benefactor is an entity, it could be a person, company, whatever, an entity that would like to create a account, let's call it a contract, one or more contracts to pay people GRC to compute. That's why it's a benefactor. That's the word. That's why we use the word benefactor here. The benefactor could be a third party, could be a angel person that just wants to put money again, for people to contribute. Could be a sponsor that, like a philanthropist, could be a project itself. If a project happens to have corporate backing or some money and they want to actually pay people more money to encourage more people to compute on their project, it could be that too. So, but the idea is the benefactors would effectively advertise a beacon similar to the way crunchers advertise a beacon. And then once their beacon is registered as a benefactor, they can then start creating something called benefactor contract. Now, we don't have the details to all this yet because it's still being worked on. It's being sketched out. And there is a paper that Will and I are working on that's getting into the gory details. And I warn you now, if you go read that paper, your head's going to spin because it does get quite complicated. And I'll go over some of the things that are in there. But effectively, the base idea is we're going to create this other layer where we're going to pay people to compute where the coins are not being generated, but they're going to be charged up into these benefactor contracts to pay out. Now, why is that so much different? Well, it's a huge difference. If you think about what that really means, somebody's got to, and I'm talking about the benefactor, has got to have those GRC to put them in the contract. So that means they either already have a balance, in which case they got the balance by either staking or crunching themselves, or they're going to have to purchase the GRC on the open market, right? Which implies an exchange of fiat to GRC. Regardless, that provides a very good sink for GRC that are being generated and people want to sell on the network. And that's been one of the biggest problems with GRC is that we have this unbalanced economic system where we're generating these GRC, but yet people don't know what to do with them except for hold them. So, and by the way, if you get into the details of the white paper that Will and I are working on, there's all sorts of knobs in there to be able to control the balance between sell pressure and the benefactor beacons and on. And we have the chance, by the way, to create a stable coin as a result of that. And I'll get into that in a minute. But effectively, this allows us to scale the amount we're paying to crunchers commensurate with the crunchers that could be part of the network, limited by the ability of benefactors to actually pay crunchers GRC. Now, why would they be motivated to do so? Well, the other thing that we're putting out in the paper is we're looking at the economics of how much it costs a individual to run a computer. And then how much does it cost a typical company or researcher, whatever, using AWS or whatever, to do a certain amount of compute, right, for themselves? And then how much would it cost them on the Gridcoin network? So what we're really constructing with this new system is a triple inequality. We're going to create a win-win-win. The idea is to create a system where it's cheaper for an entity to use Gridcoin. Even when they're paying into a benefactor contract, it's cheaper for that entity to use Gridcoin to compute than it would be for them to do it themselves privately or in a private cloud or AWS cloud. And still, even though they're paying the researchers on Gridcoin in aggregate less than they would pay their own data center or AWS, the researchers are still going to get paid more than it costs them to actually run their computers. That's where we're headed. In which case, people are going to want to participate, right? So and everybody wins. Now, how we keep that stable is a whole nother subject, but that's the idea.
Fun part.
Now,
yeah. So just to interrupt really quick, because this is something that's
a lot.
Yeah.
So,
hold on, can I just very quickly, because this is an idea that scares a lot of people.
A benefactor that has registered as a benefactor, call it a benefactor beacon. They now are authorized to create a benefactor contract. And a benefactor contract normally will be scoped to create a payment rule for a particular project that they would like to reward on, right? It could be the project themselves acting as their own benefactor. It could be a third party that says, I want to incentivize people to compute for that project over there. So I'm going to create a benefactor contract that has a payment rule in it, and I'm going to charge it up with GRC. Now, the way this is going to work is when the benefactor publishes the contract, right, they're going to charge that benefactor contract up with a GRC amount. And by the way, we're creating a number of different rules around what that GRC can be, the rate at which the GRC can be paid out, and all that kind of stuff, which is kind of a magnitude-like rate. Set that aside for today. That gets way too complicated. But effectively, what happens when the benefactor charges that contract, as soon as they send it out and it's accepted by the network, those GRC are burned. They're going to be sent to op return, and those GRC are then converted into a credit side accrual associated with the benefactor contract. So those GRC are not real anymore. Effectively, what we've done is we've created an IOU on the network that says, you, Mr. Benefactor, have taken real GRC and have now charged this contract up with GRC. There's now a credit side accrual with that equivalent amount that is recognized by the network. Now, there's no real GRC associated with that. It's just like the accrual for individual researchers. It's a number that's held by the network. The network will then execute the discharge rule in the benefactor contract to pay out researchers that are tied to that benefactor contract at the prescribed rate based on their computation. Now, we're going to use percentile racks, and we're going to use a direct payment rule rather than magnitude for these contracts, because we're going to limit an individual benefactor contract for a single project, which means the benefactor determines based on the rack rate and the rack percentile and the types of jobs that they're running, how much GRC they want to pay out for each one of those on average. And so because we're not creating benefactor contracts that span across multiple projects, we don't have to get into the apples, oranges, and pears problem that we have with the general magnitude layer 2. So we can be very specific to each benefactor and what they want to do on each project, and hone in on that on that alone, and then issue the payments based on that. So what happens is this, and it's going to make the code that's already complicated even more complicated. But what happens is when a researcher goes to stake, and I've left out a lot, but it should be obvious that researchers are going to have to sign up for, or essentially tie on to, a benefactor contract. And we're going to create something called slots, which allows them to basically pin to a particular contract that they want to contribute to that contract, which is kind of like a sub beacon, right? The sort of advertising that hey, I want to get extra rewards associated with this benefactor beacon or this benefactor contract for this project. Then once they're doing that, when they stake and their accrual is calculated, not only is their base accrual computed, but the third layer accrual is also computed, which is how much GRC they're owed. And when that GRC is paid out, it's then debited from the benefactor contracts accrual, which is an accrual on the credit side. So those coins that are being paid for layer 3 are not generated. They are, let's call them, reminted, because effectively what we did is we destroyed the coins when the benefactor contracts were charged. We created a network accrual number on the credit side, which, by the way, Jay Ringo, that's a time lock contract. That's what that is, right? You're putting the money in. It can't be spent until the rules that govern its expenditure are met. And then when the rule is met, which means I'm going to go pay this researcher this amount, monies are paid out of that pool and into the accrual of the researcher, right? Which is the time release. And then eventually the researcher stakes, and of course the stake is where the GRC are reminted on layer 3. And the reason I say reminted is because they originally existed. They existed when the benefactor charged the contract up. They get turned into an accrual and then reminted when the researchers actually paid out. So to me, it's a very elegant approach to this problem of how do we scale the network to the next layer to be able to scale reward systems. And by the way, you can imagine there's all sorts of things you can do with this, given the generality of it. So hopefully I've been as clear as mud.
Absolutely. Once we get into the details,
No one's saying
is my mic not working anymore? Hello. Hello. Is my mic on?
Done?
Testing.
Did I lose you?
There we go. No, I lost you.
Oh, it's time.
Hello. I hear you just.
So that's. I'll just keep talking. We've got a lot of
Is
work
this thing
to do on this accrual system. You can imagine that this third layer is pretty complicated, right? We've got to introduce a new concept called slots, and how to pin people into the slot for each contract. And you can imagine there could be many contracts, right? So there's a web of connections between the crunchers and the contracts, so that makes it complicated. And then we got there are a number of rules that we're going to create to solve a number of economic problems that we're worried about. You know, one of them is the free rider problem, which is this notion that people can flood in effectively, sort of overcome or sap the resources of the network, not really contributing anything, right? So I mean that we're going to limit the number of slots that are available. We're also not going to allow any benefactor contract to begin disbursement or payment until a certain number of minimum crunchers are signed up for that contract. That number will be settable. But if you think about it, if we don't do that, there could be a self-dealing problem, right? Some benefactor could set up a contract that has a very few participants being paid out. They could create fake work units to then engender payments to go. I mean, you can imagine how this could work, right? There are certain corner cases that if we don't have certain restrictions, there could be temptation to try and cheat the system. So there's a lot of work that's got to be done to ensure that the corner cases of cheating and gaming and gaming the system don't get met or tempting for folks.
Jim, can you hear me yet?
But that's the big idea as part of the next layer up. I will tell you that if this sounds like this could be an ideal mechanism to help reward smaller projects on microgrid, the answer is yes, or even Boink Central, I think, which is a complementary idea. The other idea is that, or related, is that you can imagine this. You know, you could also create grants that use this pattern, right? So a grantor could create a benefactor rule that's associated with a grant, which is the actual disbursement side of the grant for computational power. So that's a direct overlay on top of it. So that's just two or three examples on how this could be used to support a more realistic approach to incentivizing folks' computation. One last thing about this: we are looking at creating a network protocol run pricing rule. By the way, I don't have my audio muted on StreamYard, but I have it muted on the Fireside.
Yeah, and you could hear me at the start.
Hey,
I don't know. I have no idea what happened. I don't know why you would just lose my audio on StreamYard, but everyone can hear you, so it's great. That was fantastic.
I've muted my microphone on Discord, and
okay.
I hope it's not going to go in a circle and we end up with echoes. But anyway, so
they'll let us know. But that was a fantastic, detailed explanation. Thank you for even going further once you couldn't hear me, because the stuff you were adding was what I was going to add. Like, there's so much intricacy to the knobs and levers once we get into this, and this is going to be a huge part of where the rest of the community can plug in as we think about how to sort of set these knobs and levers? What should the limit be? What should the baseline be? How can we make sure that, like when Jim, you said everyone wins, that everyone wins, even those tiny projects that can't pay for compute are still getting compute done. We need to make sure that that is still a thing, because I think that's a core tenet of Gridcoin itself, is the science that can't be paid because it's paid for because it's not sexy is subsidized by a blockchain network that mints a currency. So there's a lot there, and people
That's
should
right.
be join the discussion.
The second thing, which I was getting into just a few minutes ago, is Will and I are folks have heard me say this before. When I get people coming on the network and they're saying, Gridcoin to the moon, and I'd like to see Gridcoin run up to whatever, and I just roll my eyes and it's like, go away. We're not interested in speculative investments, right? Gridcoin is not a security, folks. It's not a security. Remember that. It's a currency. Currencies need to be stable, right? And so, if anything, Will and I are trying to create knobs that will actually allow us effectively to adjust I don't know if you've read enough of the paper to see it, John, but essentially we're creating this alpha ratio that would allow us to, there's several variables there, but it essentially allows us to modify the amount that the benefactors can sink into the contracts, expressed as a percentage of the amount of coins being generated or staked, the active staking coins in the network, which effectively is a form of monetary policy, right? So the idea is to control the free coins actually available, which should adjust the sell and buy pressure on the open market and stabilize the value of Gridcoin. We believe that we can, via controlling these parameters, we can actually stabilize the value of Gridcoin on the open market against fiat.
You know what this sounds like? This sounds like, if you go back and read the CBR proposal, the last paragraph is
exactly
dynamic economics.
That's exactly what this is. That's exactly what this is.
So for folks who are like, hey, Gridcoin, they're just wheeling about. I don't know anyone who says that, by the way. But my God, go back to 2017 and look at the proposal that stabilized CBR. And it had this in it, some form of it.
That's right.
So I'm curious, though, when it comes to implementing this stuff, like, of course, there's a lot of knobs and levers that need to be defined, a lot of intricacies and game theory that needs to be worked out. Technically, is it going to be in everything at once or one thing after the other? Like,
we're not going to be able to do all of this. I think we've got that's one of the things that we've got to do now is we got to get this white paper out. And obviously some people have added some great comments to it, but we need folks to really work it over and critique it. And I'd like to get all the ideas out on the page, and then we're going to do a workshop or a let's call it a roadmap session where we work out and prioritize the sequence on how we're going to do this, because we can't do it all at once. And by the way, we can't even do it really I can't write all this myself. And we've got me and Div72, a couple other guys that are chipping in. We've got to get more resources on Gridcoin to make this a reality. But it's doable. This is not, the key about this is not rocket science. This is doable, and it's doable on the infrastructure that Gridcoin already has. It just requires some elbow grease. So, and it requires proper sequencing. We've got to figure out what can be done now, and then what can be, put on later. And if we're good, because John, how I am, I'm one of these guys. If you try and build something that's ultra super duper complicated, it just never gets done. Right. Shoot for the moon and you never get the rocket off the ground. It was too heavy. Right. So
yeah, it's like you forget that you had to build a rocket first, like in that decade. So yeah, no, I'm with you.
Make a rocket 20 million pounds and realize you don't have an engine powerful enough to get it off the ground, then it defeats the purpose. Right. So
no, that sounds like an awesome game plan for getting it out there. And then meantime, it's spreading the message within the community and trying to get more people to come in and to help build. And I know you and I have been working at getting Gridcoin out there. I think other people should come back in if they haven't been here for a while, and think about how we can get Gridcoin in front of the eyes of developers, because what you're talking about is a very interesting idea and a very interesting way to implement it. And I think people who align with sort of the ethos of Gridcoin would love to help build this thing if they see it, just because it fulfills like a personal drive to contribute something worth contributing.
I'll just remind everybody, we're one of the few networks, we're one of the few networks, the first network and one of the few that actually have decentralized oracles, right, with the scrapers. So we don't depend upon a single scraper, right? The scrapers are untrusted entities. The nodes do all the cross compares, so they're transparent, right? We are, as we talked about earlier in this session, we are the only network that is incentivizing science using a fully staked, decentralized approach to computing and validating rewards across the network. All the rest of the coins, if you go look at their common factors, John, as you said so eloquently earlier, they all use a centralized entity. They're effectively pools. All the other coins are basically using pool payments. I mean, if they'll call it whatever they want, they'll couch it, but the bottom line is when you go look at what they're doing pool payments. There's a centralized entity that's making all the decisions. We don't do that here, right? And to me, that makes Gridcoin the truest in terms of its original concepts to the original vision of this thing, right? And by the way, this idea of creating benefactor contracts that will be enforceable by the network, if that's not DeSci and DeFi, I don't know what is at the end of the day. But very narrow. We're not going to support arbitrary smart contracts to do everything because, by the way, that's where bugs creep in, right? You write these generalized contracts that can do everything, and then someone writes one where they get tripped up on their own petard, and then you have Ethernet, Ethernet Classic or whatever it's called, right? Where they wrote a bum contract and they paid out millions of Ethernet or Ether, and they shouldn't have. But we're not going to do that. So we're going to keep this narrow. And by the way, going back to your earlier point, Gridcoin has got to be very, very true to its nature. We have to make sure that we crisply and crisply define continue to define our mission, right? We're not going to do everything. We need to do a few things very, very well, and we need to know what those are. And Gridcoin from its inception has been all about contribution to science and math for the progress of humanity, right? As opposed to useless hashing. And that, to me, remains at the core of our mission, even with this next layer that's going to come on top, right? So,
and on top of that, it's doing it in a way that is true to like the original blockchain ideals, like decentralization and not having these pools, and figuring out a way to do a accrual system.
Yeah,
like this goes back to Rob. Like he's an OG in blockchain development. Like here's a way to distribute currency without a pool based just on a protocol. It's brilliant.
Yeah,
like
when it implemented, he had a single scraper, quote unquote. It's like, so the practicalities of getting it done got in the way of the concept, and we sort of restored, we put the concept back to the luster that it should have been when he came up with it. And by the way, Gridcoin is not totally decentralized. I'm going to tell you guys and gals, anybody that tells you that blockchain is total decentralization, you can go laugh at them, because at the end of the day, there is centralization even in blockchain, right? Somebody's got to write the code. Now, as John, you have so rightfully said, at the end of the day, the community has the ultimate vote on that code, because they can either install it or they can't, or they won't. There are certain you could regard the Gridcoin scraper system as semi-decentralized, right? Yes, you have 6 scrapers. That's not every node, but we've designed it in such a way that you would have to have basically 4 nodes collude with each other to trick the network into absorbing bad statistics. And since every scraper is run by an independent entity, that the chances of all 4 different independent people colluding together is ridiculously astronomically low.
You know what's crazy about this too, with the Oracle system, is when we were talking about that, there was originally the idea that, hey, one day there will be a way to for oracles to change, so you don't know who's going to be an oracle at a specific time, who's going to be a scraper, and maybe we can even make it so in order to be a scraper, you have to be like an academic institution, or we can incentivize academic institutions to want to be scrapers. And then you put in a system of sort of competition on top of collaboration. They collaborate on the network, but they're kind of competitors in the real world. So they're less likely to collude. A lot of these things that we've built are things we can build into much cooler stuff, like CBR being built into, and the accrual system being built into benefactor contracts.
That's precisely right. So the reason that we couldn't do like a rotating arbitrary pool of scrapers, like make any node a scraper, is because a single person can run an arbitrary number of nodes with different keys, right? And so if you were to allow like, let's call it random election of nodes to the network, you could actually have the same person multiply represented on the scraper system, which is not a cool thing. But in the case where we've got benefactor beacons that have been broadcasted, which just like CPIDs, we're going to come up with a mechanism which makes that real, right? And look, now a single person can also set up 2 CPIDs. I know that you can do that. I do that for development purposes on testnet. I have 3 different CPIDs I use to do testing. It's a pain in the rear. And by the way, you can't get paid anymore, because if you split your computing across the 3 CPIDs, each one of those is only 1/3 of its original magnitude. And so economically, it makes no sense to do that, right? So we're going to be, all those same concerns are going to be, are being considered for the benefactor side too. But the bottom line is, because there's no economic system in manufacturing identities on the benefactor side, that also very strongly guarantees that benefactors represent real unique entities, which are effectively independent, which probably makes it a good idea to tie eventually scrapers on top of that.
In some way, I agree with you.
Yeah,
I think
we got to think through it, but that's a very good idea.
There's a lot of different ways you can tie it, where like 1/3 of scrapers are from benefactors, 1/3 are from the community, maybe 1/3 are from something that has to do with a non-transferable token. There's so much
and we don't need that many. I think if you remember in a long time ago conversation, by the time you get over about 10, the chances of having fraud after you're at 10 scrapers is like the chances of the moon crashing into the earth are higher than that, right? So I mean, at some point, it's a diminishing returns, and you're also increasing the statistics load on the sites you're pulling the statistics from as the number of scrapers grows. So there is a limit to that, but we can have more than 6. For example, in the testnet, we're actually running 10 scrapers on testnet right now. So actually, testnet has more scrapers than mainnet does. It just turned out that way. People wanted to do it, and it's a good test of scalability on the scraper side. But that's how it works. And, the other thing I think that's an improvement that we're going to be looking at is how to build more and better adapters to adapt Gridcoin to different scoreboard systems. So, obviously, as we start to add another compute layer on top of this, right, which is incentivized better than the base layer, the interest is going to grow, and it's going to put motivation to us to increase the ability to have other computing domains besides BOINC. I think a huge success, quite frankly, is this folding at home adapter, which has gone like gangbusters. I mean, I actually pulled the statistics out of the scraper directory the other day, just looking at how we're doing on folding at home. We've already got over 150 CPIDs on folding at home, and we are doing 410 million points per day on folding at home. Only about a quarter of that is on the Gridcoin team, by the way. So there are a lot of people that are part of other teams. They're actually probably dual mining between Gridcoin and Curecoin, which you can do, and other, who knows. But the bottom line is we're generating over 400 million points per day on folding at home. My guess is we'll top out at probably 500 or 600 million, which sounds a lot lower than what Banano or Purecoin is contributing. But you got to remember, those coins are only contributing to one computing domain, folding at home, whereas we're supporting 15, right? So, when you think, well, that's a lot lower than the others, when you add up, remember, people are contributing to 15 different projects or have the choice of contributing to 15 different projects in Gridcoin. Folding at home is just one of them. So the fact that we're, 1/15 of our network power, roughly, it's hard to say, but assuming they're fairly equal, 1/15, quote unquote, of our network power is 410 million points per day on folding home is pretty impressive. I mean, it's amazing the power of the network that we already have. And quite frankly, it could be bigger, right?
That's the goal. That's the goal. There's so much being developed having to do with distributed computing, compute over data. There's several new platforms that are taking some of the ideas from BOINC and building them out into new stuff. That's really, really cool. And there's at least one new platform that's looking at distributed computing in a completely different way. It flips it, where instead of bringing the data to your PC to run compute on it, you bring the algorithm to the data where it's stored and run it there. So you don't need to download like 6 petabytes worth of data to analyze it. And then once the algorithm runs on that data where it lives, you get the results back. Like, very interesting stuff happening in the space. And Jim, I don't know if you're going, but there is a Compute Over Data conference in Boston, May 9th and 10th, I believe. That's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of these projects are going to be talking. I know Levy's going to be there talking about, I think, incentivization and game theory.
Yeah, Will and I planning on going. So
that's awesome. Yes. So are you going to be talking about Benefactor contracts?
Yeah, would like to be. So we filled out our application. So
yep. Cool. I think they'll be getting back to us pretty soon. And then I think I'll be talking about the power of the public and the I think it's 6,000 exaflops that David Anderson said in 2019 existed in the world already, and like the bringing the ethos of Gridcoin and BOINC to all these newer projects that are spinning up and might be too focused on development to really think about, hey, should we subsidize compute for these scientific projects? Because we have to also remember, compute is more than just science. The entire world essentially runs on compute. All your tweets need compute. So that's what they're thinking about.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. If you go look at the run up in Rosetta at home and then also folding at home during the pandemic, and you look at folding at home ballooned outwards. Their compute power went up by almost a factor of 50, if I recall, during the pandemic, because people wanted to solve the virus, right? They wanted to create a vaccine. And by the way, people weren't being paid by folding at home to do that unless they were being cited. But that was before we actually had the adapter done. So basically it was Purecoin and Banano that were incentivizing folding at home folks. But a lot of folding at home folks weren't participating in any coin at all. They were just doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. But think about that. People giving away computing for free, completely volunteer based. And the folding at home supercomputer was exaflop based. That's how big it was. So if you imagine we create the right incentivization structure, the right gamification, we could actually have a pool of computing that size all the time, not just when people are worried about a virus, right? So
and then maybe we stop the virus before it becomes a pandemic.
Before it ever starts.
Yep.
The key is to be contributing to Rosetta and folding at home now, before the next pandemic. Not
too much foresight.
Right?
Okay, so I feel bad because we did get some
questions.
By
the way,
because we did get some questions in the chat.
Okay, let's go take a look at them. Hold on a minute.
Okay.
Which one are you talking about?
Nicholas Goss here says, is it possible to set up a Benefactor contract for things other than racks, such as changing credit or completing tasks? Say a whitelisted project wants to distribute equal pay over 10,000 tasks.
So we're not. I don't like. The answer is yes. It's possible. Whether you want to pay in what we call credit delta or not, that's a long. We actually looked at that to change the base layer into a TCD. John remembers those acronyms. Total credit delta.
Yep.
And we determined that was a bad idea. Number one, because it requires a lot more storage in the super block to track, because you have to track a watermark for every single person for every single project, right? So it creates this Whereas you create you've got a one-dimensional vector of magnitudes and accrual numbers. Now you have to have a two-dimensional vector to track watermarks in every single project. The other thing is that the projects tend to be very lumpy around how they reward credit, and sometimes projects give negative credit due to issues that happen, whatever. And negative credit, you can imagine, in accrual systems don't get along very well, right? So rather than do that, and it also gives the opportunity for people to cheat, right? So if you were to try and game a project and you created like a fake results and you were to get the inject those and then get credit before the rest of the network could figure out that you were gaming the system, you could actually get GRC for that if you were paying on total credit delta before everyone realized what was going on. The beauty about RAC is that RAC has a 7-day half-life, so it takes a while to respond to any movement in the actual credit being granted underneath, which provides a natural resistance or latency for cheating to be exposed before people can get any benefit out of it. So I'm not the ramp up and ramp down. No one is going to, Nicholas, I'm going to tell you, no one is going to want to set up a benefactor contract that's going to last a day. And we don't want them doing that. I mean, we're not Gollum. I'm going to tell you this right now. This is not creating a Gollum thing where someone can create a short-term contract for arbitrary compute. That's not what this is. And in fact, we're still debating as a team on what whitelisting will be required for benefactors and all that kind of stuff. How will they engage in the whitelisting process? We're not going to allow benefactors to just write up crazy contracts to do any type of compute they want. So these benefactor contracts are going to be effectively pretty long-lived things. Benefactor contract will probably be paid out over weeks or months based on the type of compute that's being done, right? So this is not a quick hit thing. So, I mean, our view is RAC is here to stay. It also makes it a lot easier for the different nodes to agree on the statistics that you're computing. So, I think RAC's going to be around. So answering earlier questions, which are good also from Nicholas. So as far as I know, no other coin uses an accrual and real-time payment system like we do. We're the only one.
And to back that up, we were the first distributed computing coin, blockchain-based, in 2013. So, and we had it essentially then. Not perfect, but the idea was there.
The other coins that are doing distributed computing contribution payments are using a pool approach, right? So they have some centralized process that pulls the statistics down. Everyone has to sign up to that accrual system, or to that pool system effectively. They might not call it a pool, but it's a pool. And then the system figures that out, and the system issues a payment, right? That's not really what we're doing. But what we're doing is a lot harder to solve. I think SureCoin actually may be working on something similar to what we're doing now. They're probably taking peeks at our code, is my guess. But no one is doing it.
And think of how intense that is. No one's done it yet, and no one's been able to do it in a different way. No one's done proof of useful work yet. No one's built these things because it's not easy to build.
Yep. All right, the zero mag question. So the answer is lots of wallets stake with zero mag. There are many wallets that are staking that either are not crunchers at all. In other words, they don't have a CPID registered, or they have a CPID and they have no magnitude. If that's the case, they get the CBR portion of the stake only. And for those of you who've seen those types of blocks, they're the gold blocks. So if you stake just a base stake, a CBR only, you're going to get 10 plus the fees for the block, which is pretty low because there are not that many transactions in the Gridcoin network. So you might get like 10.015 or something like that, and your block is going to look gold, and that's a CBR or a staking layer only a block. If you are a researcher that has more than zero magnitude, you're going to get a purple block, which is denoting that you got paid your 10 CBR plus your accrued rewards from the crunching layer. right? So that's how that works. And yeah, there's lots of blocks that are staked that are not staked by researchers. We have investors that are just out there staking the coin just to help us out with security by keeping their coins online, and they play a very, very valuable role in the security of the coin, and we're very happy that they're there. That was, John, I'll remind everyone, that was a big victory when we did the constant block reward. We were one of the biggest problems. We had very, very low difficulty on the network. I mean, and that was because, if you remember, we were paying interest.
APR.
Yeah, we were paying APR. And so what people would do is, since that APR the clock would keep running whether you had your wallet online or not, people would just shut their wallet down, let 6 months go by, and then when they were ready to get their payment, they'd start up their wallet, wait till it's staked, and shut it back down again. Well, that's not what we meant. That's not what we wanted. We want people to be actively securing the network. And so that was the origin of constant block rewards, is you're going to get paid a constant amount for every block you stake, which means that if you want to get paid well staking, you got to keep your wallet on 24/7. That was in staking. That was the whole idea. And boy, did it work. We went from if you recall, we were at an average network difficulty of, I think, 3. And now we're averaging 20. And each unit of difficulty is 10 million coins online and staking. So now our average number of coins staking is almost half the entire circulation amount of Gridcoin, which is 430 million coins. Almost half of it is staking at any one time. It's amazing. Which, by the way, from a security perspective on the network, is extremely, extremely good. The chances of having any interloper come in and execute a 51% attack on us with that many coins online is very, very low. So the CBR fulfilled its intended purpose and has done very well for us over the last few years. And by the way, that number has continued to climb up a little bit. So when we first implemented it, it went literally within a few months. It went from 2 or 3 up to like 10, 9 or 10, and then slowly over time it's just continued to go up. Over the years. And now it's averaging about 20. So it's pretty amazing.
Good track record of ideation and execution in this here coin.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know there's some people that wish we'd move faster.
Okay, and learn to code and help.
That's it. No one's stopping you from jumping in. We're open source. People sometimes ask me, well, how do I get started? Go submit a PR. Go pick something. You can ask. If you don't know where to start, there's lots of issues, lots of things that we got out there. There's really good people on Discord here. If you like Slack, you can come on Slack too, although we're starting to shift away from it because the limited history on it. But plenty of people to talk to, ask what you can help, or just jump in. I mean, that's how I got started with it. What, more than 5 years ago at this point? I just started. And first of all, I've been a BOINC contributor, a distributed computing contributor, just for my own personal point out, since July of 1999. That's when I started SETI at Home with the old original SETI at Home client, which I still have stuck in a directory here somewhere for a museum. And then the BOINC era, as everyone knows, which had occurred in what was that, 2003 or 4, something like that.
Something like that, yep.
And then everyone converted over to BOINC from the original native SETI client. And then I've been doing it ever since. And so I'm a long time distributed computing person myself. I'm like number 300 in the world in BOINC. And it's been all my own hosts and all my own electricity I paid for. So, but this is a really unique community, and we right now don't have like oodles and oodles. We don't have a corporate sponsor out here funding us with millions of dollars, but what we do have is an active, very dedicated community that we have a great ethos. Right, we're doing it for the right reasons. And if you want to do development work, just jump in and submit a PR. You got to know C++.
And if you can't do dev work, you can help find people who can come join them. There's so much more stuff you can do.
We need help with documentation. We need help. I mean, John and all the rest of the group need help with the marketing work, creating presentations, We need help on our, our sort of our umbrella organization. I'll call it sister umbrella organizations, SI. We just need help, and we need dedicated community members to come in and help. If you believe in the cause, if you believe in what we're doing, please help us.
Dial 1-800.
I know, it's starting to sound like the local NPR, or they just did the on the local classical station, whatever they in the NPR news station, they did the local twice a year fundraising, right? If you believe in your local programming, please give for a cause. No, seriously, if you believe in what we're doing, your elbow grease is great, and there is no shortage of things that we need done. I was going to say Alex in particular is trying to work on rewriting the all the user guides.
And he's going with Boink too. Like user guides for Boink, Gridcoin, everything.
Alex is on a warpath, and we got to fix all this. It's terrible. I mean, when you go look, and by the way, even our own solo mining guides and all that kind of stuff are way too complicated. They were written from the point of view of somebody that already knows what they're doing. So the problem is when you read them as a new user, it offers too many. It's the supermarket effect. It offers too many choices, too many pathways, and people just get confused. And so, we've seen it, on Discord, people come in and they get confused between pool mining and solo mining, and they've done half of each, and everything's all messed up, and they get very frustrated. And part of that's because the documentation is actually leading them astray. And so, to streamline the documentation, simplify it, take it from the point of view of what a new user would see is very, very important. And we need a lot of elbow grease with that across the board. Gridcoin's own documentation needs to be improved. Our own help guides need to be improved. Boinks are even in they really need
that says it all right there. All right, we've been here for over an hour at this point.
All right,
let's start wrapping it up. We'll be back, guys, in a couple weeks. Hopefully there will be some discussion about Benefactor contracts and some ideas, some feedback. Hopefully someone will hate it so we can really have a conversation, and we'll talk more about that. If not, then we'll find something else to talk about, and it'll be a lot of fun. So thanks everyone for joining us in the chat. I enjoyed the blue smiley face. I don't know if that emoji came across, but it came across in text and it was very funny. So, have a great week, guys. And maybe we'll see you in Boston. It's free to register. It's free to go. May 9th and 10th, guys. Come represent.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.